Rod Ovitt here with another Take 5. Studies that we bring to you every Monday through Saturday on our Facebook page for Rod Ovitt and for Logos Institute of Biblical Studies. So glad to be here with you, and today we're having part 2 of our series, Hard Hearts, Penetrating Love. And it looks at a couple passages that talk about the same situation, and that's where Jesus sent the disciples across the Lake of Galilee after feeding the 5,000. And they were out there struggling in a storm, and he walks to them on the water, and they freak out. And basically, we looked yesterday in the passage found in Mark chapter 6, and we focused on they were completely amazed, the disciples, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. And we took some time to look at the word hardened because so many of us as believers immediately jump to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and we put a motive behind it, but we discussed how the word that was being used there really didn't talk about that motive. It just meant that they did not have the ability, the capacity to understand. It just was not in their worldview. They weren't expecting God to become flesh, not yet. And so today, I want to look at the Matthew passage. Same situation, a few more details than the others because he talks about Peter walking on the water, and we'll pick it up there. Matthew 14:25. During the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out for fear. And remember, we mentioned that most of the people living during those days feared deep, still waters because they called it the abyss, and they believed that evil spirits would live there. And with all the caves around the shore, dead bodies were buried there, and they believed there were ghosts. And so they thought something was going on here, and it really, really frightened them to the bone. In fact, the word afraid there is phobeo. And phobeo looks like the word phobia. That's where we get the word phobia from. It's a strong fear. We know what a phobia is. I mean, you can talk all day long to someone that has a phobia about heights, but you're not going to convince them to look down from a height. You're not going to convince them that a ladder's safe. I have a friend that has a phobia with elevators, and, you can talk all day long about the safety of elevators, and even if you get stuck, there's a mechanic there, et cetera, et cetera. But, hey, if you have that claustrophobia, you're just not interested in going into an elevator. Well, they had a phobia about this, phobeo. They were extremely afraid at seeing this sight. And Jesus said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and we're back to that phobeo, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Now, again, just like we mentioned the first day, we're so quick to judge, and Peter gets blasted on this, and I say, hold it. I mean, he got out of the boat. This wasn't like just take a step forward and test it with your foot, and if it doesn't feel like it's going to hold you, jump back in the boat. No, he had to climb down from where he was over the side and get down on the water. He was committed by the time he got out of the boat. This wasn't some timidity to begin with. He committed himself, and he was walking toward Jesus. So the issue here is the distractions. All of a sudden, he saw the water pounding, he heard the wind, and all of a sudden he was in the thick of it, and he began to lose heart. He began to, perhaps, change his mind, and he began to sink. And now he's really afraid. "Save me," he says to Jesus. And I love this. Jesus immediately, it says, immediately. He didn't play with him. He didn't toy with him. He immediately put out his arm and grabbed Peter and caught him. It says he reached, he stretched out his hand and he caught Peter. And then he rebuked him a little bit, and I think there's a little playfulness going on here. Jesus knows that Peter tried, and he says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And we always make that so stern, like he clears his throat and goes, "Oh, thou of little faith," like it's some big pronouncement. It's only time the word's used here, and it's an aliag pistos. And aliag pistos is basically a compound word. It's from aligos, which just means puny. And so he makes this compound word, probably made it up, and he just says, "Hey, you of puny faith, why did you doubt?" And again, he didn't use the normal word for doubt. This might be a play on word too. It's distazo, and it means to waver. And we get that word waver from the waves, back and forth. So here's Jesus, perhaps just jiving him a little bit, "Peter, you were doing so well. What happened to your faith? Why'd you turn so puny all of a sudden?" Because then we see they go back to the boat, they climb in, and as soon as Jesus sat in the boat, the winds stopped. Now where had they seen that before? Jesus gets up from a sleep, and he's pretty much angry. And he says to the wind, "Muzzle it." Nothing formal, nothing holy, nothing pedantic with that, nothing where we take our voice and say hello. No, he says, "Muzzle it," like you'd say to some loud brother running around the room when you're trying to sleep. "Knock it off." And the wind stopped. And both then and in this situation, they said, "Truly you are the Son of God." And they were afraid both times because this was a godlike action. We hear of prophets and those in the Old Testament doing things with water, but the only time anyone walks on water, it's God. It says he walks upon the water. There's not a man that's ever walked upon water. So what do we learn from this? Our God is powerful. He rules over nature, and if he wants to walk on water, guess what? He'll do it. And if we find ourselves in a situation where we're joining him, that's awesome. Go as far as you can. But know that if you get caught up in the waves and the wind and the distractions and you start to sink, Jesus will be right there. And he reaches out his hand and he grabs you immediately. And then ever so lovingly says, "Come on, why'd you wimp out? You were doing so well." Know that God loves you. He's not some grouchy old guy in the sky. This is a God that gave everything for us. And he wants us to give in return. He wants a relationship. Can you do that? He wants you to put your foot out of the boat once in a while. Try it out. Trust him. So whereas we might have hearts that can't see things from time to time, and we might have hearts that don't quite understand, we can rest assured that our God has a penetrating love, a love that focuses on us like a laser beam, a love that lifts us up and puts us in the boat, then calms the storm. You think on those things today. Give him your storm. Tell him you want to try at least to walk on some water and see if you don't just have a blessed